Hello and welcome to Taking the Supply Chain Pulse. I'm Megan with St. Ange Company, and thanks for joining us. In today's episode, Fred sits down with Tracy Cleveland, the VP of Supply Chain from Munson Healthcare. Together, they reflect on the vast changes to the supply chain industry and where they see it heading in the future. It's a thoughtful and engaging conversation with plenty of takeaways. And now here's your host, Fred Kranz.
We have a special guest, Tracy Cleveland, the VP of Supply Chain for Munson Healthcare in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. Did I get that right, Tracy?
You did. We're in the Northwest Lower.
I mean, that is a unique description of where you're located. I guess it's been a month or so ago now, I sent out a questionnaire to a bunch of people because I was going to be celebrating 60 years in healthcare, and I wanted to do a special podcast, but I wanted questions from the listeners. And Tracy sent me back a list of questions that I realized was a podcast in itself. So I didn't use any of the questions Tracy sent me during the podcast that we recorded, because I wanted to do this whole podcast where he and I will answer the same questions together. But before we do that, Tracy, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Munson Healthcare.
Sure. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you inviting me onto this program. I am the Supply Chain Vice President for Munson Healthcare, which supports 11,000 square miles in northern Michigan as our service area. We're the primary healthcare provider in the northern Lower Peninsula of Michigan. I have been in supply chain since about 1993. And so that puts me at about 32 years, not anywhere near 60. But in the time that I've been doing that, Fred and I have crossed paths a couple of times. And so I appreciate his wisdom and sage advice when it's available. So I'm happy to spend some time with you today.
Great. Well, let's just get right into the question. So what I'd like to do is we'll read the question, and then you give a response, and then I'll respond to your response. How's that?
Okay.
So in technology, this is really interesting. While you have been in the business, we have gone from clipboards and pencils to scanners, scales, and bots. What technology do you think has helped, and where do you think technology falls short? In your 30-some years, answer that question.
So I think where technology provides visibility into data around product utilization or trending in one direction or another is probably the most helpful when it comes to the procurement team. And then those labor assist technologies are the ones when we're talking about logistics and operations and getting product from one spot to another. As our workforce is aging, we want to make sure that we're avoiding injury at all cost and keeping people at work.
So what labor assist technologies are you folks utilizing?
We, about 2 years ago, found an automated robotic pallet wrapper. And so you load it up with your stretch wrap and place it right next to the pallet, and it will give you the perfect tension wrap on that pallet. And it's not a guy going around and around and around the pallet, bent over, hurting his back, and wasting the shrink wrap. The robot puts it at just the right tension and uses significantly less wrap than a person. So
wow.
Safety and savings.
Any other things you're considering?
I'd really like to understand if we could get conveyor technology for a small environment. Generally that's for a really large distribution center. I'd like to know, find a way to get that conveyor technology in a smaller environment and make it make sense for many of the same reasons.
So, from my perspective on this, having started out in the time of stones and notepads that you carve things into rocks with, I think the biggest technology is the advance of computers and being able to aggregate data. We literally did do everything manually, and fortunately, and that we'll keep returning to this. When I started, most of the hospitals in America were standalone community hospitals. There were the growth of what we call systems didn't start until the late 80s, early 90s, to become prevalent like it is today. So we really had to manage one hospital, maybe a couple clinics off site. And if you were there, you pretty much knew where everything was, knew what was being used, but you still had to go around and physically take inventory or physically make paper orders and physically do all the work. The advance of computer technology changed everything. But and you and I both are friends with Ed Hiscock, who's one of the great data guys. The big problem with the technology always works well, but the failing point in that was the accuracy of the data that you're using to help support decisions. And I think that we've gotten better with that, far better. And I think that still, however, you have to apply governance and oversight to make sure that the data that you're using is good. But I don't know where places would be today without the ability to process data as quickly and as well as we can.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I started, the first thing I did in the morning when I came in was sign purchase orders with a pen and remember to push hard enough to get through all 4 copies.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then we had to do manual, the receiving was manual, everything. How much do you think we have shortened cycles, like the payment cycle and stuff, just by the presence of the computers,
Oh, weeks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it really happened, folks. That's the way it was. The next series of next subject of your question was relationships. And your question was, do relationships between suppliers and supply chain professionals bring value, or does the hospital end up leaving money on the table? Now I want you to answer this first because you're still in the game every day, and you might want to tell over your 30 years how your relationships with suppliers has changed.
It has. So I think the jury on this one is still out. Where with Let me qualify. I pursue relationship with the people that I do business with. I think it's important to understand one another as human beings and identify if you have a shared goal, something that you can work on together. And if you're both working toward a shared goal, the outcome is generally better than if you are anonymous to one another. I internally within the health system, this is not. I don't believe it's the predominant opinion. I think people move. Executive leadership, other supply chain leaders would say that you need to have an objective, a completely objective, nearly anonymous methodology for finding the best value for the organization. Where I think that falls short is when there's a problem to be solved. And then you want somebody at the table who understands what your health system is committed to, what the problem is, and what a potential outcome could look like that is beneficial to both the supplier and the health system.
Yeah. So if I were to ask you this, do you think that most organizations still retain the old adversarial approach to suppliers?
I think they do. I think it's us versus them.
Yep. And win versus lose, right?
Right.
And I would have to say this. I was a liberal arts major. I was a history major, not a business major. And by the time I went into leadership, I'd already spent 7 years as a caregiver working on the floors with patients and stuff. So I probably had a different perspective than many of the people that were already there. You know, the purchasing agents and all those hard dealing guys and women that were out there. And I've always had this approach to listen to everybody's story or everybody's offering objectively. And when I thought there was something that we could benefit from, start to forge relationships that serve both ends. You know, the guy that's selling stuff has got to make money too. He's got to understand that he or she's got to understand that you need to have a favorable outcome as well. I mean, historically, the worst case scenario of all has always been the orthopedic guys that would go in and talk to the doctors and take you right out of the process just so they could get whatever they wanted the doctors to use to be put in use. And I think, in fact, I know that most organizations are changing toward a more collaborative approach. But I really like the fact that you were honest enough to say that the whole adversarial approach is still behind a lot of people's thought process. And I think now that things are becoming more difficult for everyone, it's going to be more and more important to drop that and start to, say, hey, what do you want to accomplish? This is what we want to accomplish. Maybe we can do things to help us both come out favorable.
Right. And I think some manufacturers and suppliers need to really look at the margin that we're talking about. Hospitals are having trouble making a positive margin at all. And some suppliers are still 18, 20, 24% profit margins. And that's an imbalance that isn't sustainable.
Right. Especially with the looming effects of some of the legislation that's out there, the reduction of people that will have access to health care, which means that your place is going to have to still treat emergency cases, and you're going to have to take the hit for people that don't pay. So people need to be more aware and more collaborative. And I think people get it. But I watch salesmen are still salesmen. They still want to sell you something whether you need it or not. And I've tried to tell people for years that healthcare is not a push sale, it's a pull sale. We buy things because we need something. We buy services because we need a service. But the sales philosophy is to push that on you, and have you make their decision.
Well, and one more thing. When there is a relationship and there's some understanding about the health system, it doesn't mean that we don't still perform an RFP. And so I think the person who has a relationship with the health system has the inside track because they understand what our priorities are and they understand what it is we're working toward, whereas another supplier may not. And so if they don't capitalize on that relationship, shame on them.
Right. And how long have you been at Munson?
5 years, a little over 5 years.
Okay, so you got 5 years of relationship building. You have people that you know that you can respect and trust. And so you have a collaborative relationship with them, whether it's formal or not. You have built that trust over time. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, and happy to say that people that I have known over the course of my career followed me, as it were, to Traverse City. So I didn't have to start over. Um, there's that national presence for many of these manufacturers. So
Right.
that's helpful.
Okay, now a category that I think is really interesting. The hardest category when you talk about metrics and you talk about comparing apples to apples, we work in an industry where we're actually trying to compare apples to fruit salad because everybody measures everything differently. So your question was this, and I'm going to turn it right around on you. Why is it so hard to find common supply chain metrics across the industry for benchmarking supply chain performance?
My first answer is I don't know. I think that in part there is a sense of protection around the operation. And so when we start to try and identify common metrics or common variables, people don't want to show. It's there's a bit of protection or geofencing around their operation that they're just not prepared to share. And I don't understand the hesitation when it comes to a collaborative benchmarking effort. It just, I understand the difference between academic medical center and a small community hospital and a veterans hospital or a different specialty hospital, that they're different. But I believe that we can find common metrics and build a benchmark that we could compare our efficiency and our productivity and our effectiveness in a way that's non-threatening. I still think it's possible. I just don't know how to get there.
So do you measure, what do you measure?
We measure everything from lines picked to dollars spent to savings achieved per professional, per category. We measure all sorts of data elements within the supply chain that would be absolutely happy to say, we'll pick these 5 and we can all publish these 5 metrics and just see what it is comparatively.
Before we dive back in, you may be asking yourself, is my supply chain future ready? At St. Company, we don't just optimize logistics, we engineer smarter, leaner, and more resilient systems from end to end. From manufacturing to retail to healthcare, our experts bring decades of experience and cutting-edge strategies to transform your operations. Visit and discover how we're shaping the future of supply chain one solution at a time.
Yeah, I've always thought that wanting to compare yourself against someone nationally served no purpose. Here's the way I've always looked at metrics. I've looked at, first off, all of our customers are usually clinical areas or specialty areas that have unique things that they do and that they can measure. And I've thought, number one, that when I wanted to do metrics, I would talk with someone and say, okay, what are the important things that you want? You tell me what you think we should measure, and we'll measure that. and then the comparison that I think is important is measuring your performance against yourself. If you get down to if-then, if I'm going to get a robot to push supplies around, and it costs me X amount of labor dollars right now to do this, the robot costs Y. How much will my labor dollars plus the robot cost me? These are things you can measure.
Yep.
and
these are things that we do measure. My concern is we can compare ourselves to ourselves and watch our marginal improvement over time. But if there's a similar sized organization somewhere else, let's say Southeast Michigan or Iowa or somewhere
right.
else, and they're much better at it than I am, then I'm comparing myself to myself and I'm still lousy. I would like
So,
to know if I'm lousy or not.
so what you're saying is you want to find a similar cohort that you can identify, maybe regionally, because regionally is very important. I think regionally is far more important than nationally. Okay, I just came back from a meeting in Chicago yesterday, and I drove out and drove back, and I think probably the raw price of gasoline is the same in every one of those places, but that's not what you pay at the pump. It varied from under $3 to I stopped at one place coming back yesterday and they were out of 87 octane, so I had to pay over $4 for 89 octane. Uh, but regionally, I think is a valid comparison. So I guess you could probably get together a group of cohorts and build a collaborative. Say, hey, let's measure these things together. And at the same time, if you see that they're doing something at 96 cents on the dollar for something you're doing at 105, you can call a person up and say, what are you doing? Tell me what you're doing that I'm not.
Yeah.
And that's a different way to use the data, I believe, more accurate. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah. And I know that competitors or even regional colleagues are sometimes reluctant to share their pricing, where there's certain things we can't share, but um, just performance, I think it's achievable.
Well, the next set of questions is, I think this is interesting because I never thought about this until you asked this, but I've always had this one pet area that I'll talk about when it's my turn. Infrastructure investment. Where is the most important deferred maintenance investment for a healthcare supply chain? Docks, elevators, replenishment tech, or other?
So for me right now, it is almost everything infrastructure because for years the way capital was allocated was through a sort of competitive process where people would come to a meeting annually and pitch their capital request. And however could an elevator compete with a linear accelerator or an MRI, right? And so the very exciting medical technology would win and the infrastructure would be deferred perhaps again and again. But the cost to the organization when an elevator goes down is incredible. The patient experience suffers, efficiency suffers. You may incur injuries that you wouldn't otherwise incur because of longer trips or using the stairs or whatever. And so um, I believe that it is that dock, elevator, uh, facilities infrastructure that has suffered, and supply chain's right behind, you know, um, right behind it with replenishment technology and work assist. But I think the buildings are probably suffering the most.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what my pet area is here, but historically, capital was a real key point for me, and I tried to have the organizations that I was responsible for develop long-term capital plans that provided every year for net, routine replacement of items. You buy a bed, if it was made by Hill-Rom, you could buy it when you're 20 and still be using it when you're 80. And it never, never, never gets looked at, but it needs to be. So we would develop percentages for, replacement of aging technology and then clinical technology and then contingencies. And you would always have to fight that the doctors always had been to RSNA or some conference that they saw something with more lights than whatever they were using now had and wanted it this year. But the area that I think, especially if you're in an IDN that is acquiring and growing, the area of biggest opportunity that I see is central supply sterile processing. That's the area that sterilizers last forever too. And the only way that anybody ever takes a look at sterile processing is when something goes wrong. But if you pick up, if you acquire 3 hospitals, you've acquired three sterile processing operations that are outdated, outmoded, and need to be looked at immediately, but never get looked at. So that's the area that I think is the biggest opportunity for places to take action, make plans, and improve operations and lower costs.
Well, especially if you're planning a growth strategy. If you introduce a new service line or hire a new physician, you need to be able to push those cases through in a timely way without over investing in the instrumentation and implants or whatever it is that he or she specializes in. So that's part of the building. From my perspective, the sterilizers have to work, the washers have to work, the elevators have to work between sterile processing and the OR, arrive in the clean core on time and fully available.
Yeah, so we were talking about the same thing. I just got a more specific niche in there. So the last thing, finally, communications, and I have to read this. You started before email or smartphones. Official communication was by U.S. mail. Was the quality of the communication better when you had to take the time to compose a letter and then send it on a 3-day journey to the recipient? Okay, you first.
Well, I didn't have the total world-changing communication impact that I think you have lived through. But I'll tell you, even when I started, we were using the landline telephones to have our conversation. So there was not text, there was not commonly email communication. And so I think that the composition and content of the communication was better because it was more thoughtfully constructed. And there wasn't this sense of real-time, immediate urgency to respond. And I think some of that urgency is because the technology allows it. Your phone buzzes on your hip and you want to know what did they say? Who is it? What's going on? So I think it was better. What do you think?
Well, interestingly enough, when I started, as soon as I became a director, which was probably 1974 or so, I use a telephone. I prefer communication by voice. Okay. And there are 2 types. There's the external with the vendors that you're talking about. There was also the internal. And in those days, the internal communication was either get out of your office and go talk to someone face to face, or send an inter-office memo. And an inter-office memo was always a CYA event, really, when you get right down to it. Something had happened. You wanted to make sure that whatever you said was recorded and carbon copied to whoever it needed to be copied to, so that you didn't get chewed out. And I hated that, because the best communication is face to face. The best communication is talking to each other and asking questions and relating to each other with respect. Sometimes you do have to formalize things, and if especially if there was a problem with a vendor or a shipment or whatever, something of that nature, you did have to send those letters and stuff. But it was a last resort. I mean, I've always prided myself on being willing to show up and take my medicine from somebody if I messed up face to face and say, I'm sorry, what can I do to make this better? And that seems to work. It still works today. The biggest problem I've seen for our communication is that from when we're talking with suppliers, we've never talked with their supply chain. We've always talked with their salespeople. And I think that what I'm seeing now coming more and more into being is organizations that are becoming more familiar with the supply chains of the suppliers that they deal with. And I think there's been some real benefit to that. Have you had any experience with that?
Well, since the pandemic, that has been a real focus to understand where is this product coming from, where is it manufactured, what's the real status of its transportation, all of that. So I think that we have had to become more well informed on what's going on in the supply chain from the supplier to us, rather than just when the product hits our dock to when it gets utilized by the patient. Now we need to kind of understand what's happening from the point of origin all the way to the dock and then to the patient. And sometimes at a very detailed level, because of the components and if they can be, um, counterfeit or not. Again, back during the pandemic, we at Munson Healthcare had one example where we ended up with counterfeit product.
Wow.
And we identified it before it was ever went beyond our dock. And then we had to work backward through the distributor that had brought it to us, and then where did they get it? And, so we were made whole. They were made whole. Somebody got arrested further back up the chain. But to your point, we need to know now, where we used to just take it on faith that the product that was coming to the dock was what we ordered and it was appropriate. That is not always the case today.
Okay, well that's all the questions, Tracy. But there was one thing that you and I had talked about a little while ago, that I just have you comment on, because I know that not being Trinity Health in Livonia, Michigan, and not being one of the gigantic places, being in the upper lower peninsula of Michigan, you probably face challenges with acquiring and retaining folks for your supply chain. How do you go? Is that a big issue for you? And if so, how do you go about getting the people you need and keeping them?
Yeah, so recruiting talent to Northern Michigan is a challenge, and not just in supply chain. Recruiting physicians, recruiting nurses, recruiting rad techs, and the whole 9 yards. Everybody. There are no longer enough people to fill all of the roles that we have within the health system. I think we have over 400 vacancies in our health system today.
Wow.
And so we are doing everything from working with foreign recruiters to going to college campuses across the upper Midwest, to recruit new grads and new people into healthcare. And then we are also sort of a hybrid environment now. So they don't have to come all the way to Traverse City to be a part of our team. And so that remote work component has made its way into our team. And so our procurement team and sourcing team are rarely together in an office environment anymore. So being able to get up from your desk and walk down the hallway and talk to one of your colleagues is now getting on a video call and entering their office via virtual communication, but still incredibly valuable because of that cross connection and common components across service lines, right? And so I'm really looking for those people who are committed to supply chain excellence, who want to be a part of what's going on up here. Hopefully they'll want to come and move up here and be part of our community, but maybe not. And so we have to adapt and see how we can make it work best.
Well, I think they should want to give Traverse City a look. I know I've always wanted to go visit the Upper Peninsula, and I've never been there, so I might make it yet before my time runs out here.
Well, you can do two birds with one stone. Traverse City is a beautiful vacation destination all on its own. And then the Upper Peninsula is just about an hour and a half drive, and the mighty Mackinac Bridge up and across that's just an experience all by itself.
That's my goal has always been to drive across the Mackinac Island Bridge, So, Tracy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you on. I always look forward to talking with you. I know that I see your name a lot of times in some of the stuff I write and everything, and I appreciate that. And I wish you continued good luck and good health.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you stick with us as long as you enjoy it. You've been a real gift to the supply chain community over the years, and we appreciate your reflections, your advice, and your guidance. So thank you.
Thank you, and have a good day, Tracy. Thank you.
Well, that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and connect with us online so you'll never miss an episode and can catch up on all the ones you might have missed. Got a topic you're fired up about, or maybe you want to be a guest on the show? Fred would love to hear from you. Just reach out at fcrans@stonge.com. We'll see you next time.